My sister called me from Portland at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, crying so hard I could barely make out what she was saying. Something about the holidays, something about how the family hadn't been together in so long, something about how our grandmother was getting older, and wouldn't we all regret it someday if we didn't come home. I was sitting in my apartment in Austin, half asleep, still in my work clothes because I'd fallen asleep on the couch editing a deck for a client presentation the next morning. I said yes before I was even fully awake. That was my first mistake. I'm Meredith. I'm 32 years old. I work in brand strategy for a mid-size consulting firm, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days convincing companies that their image problems are actually fixable. I'm good at reading people. I'm good at spotting the gap between what someone says and what they actually mean. I've built a career on it. And somehow, for 32 years, I managed to be completely blind to the fact that my own family had been running a very clean, very quiet operation on me for a very long time. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your business and your grandmother runs into your high school teachers at the grocery store. My parents are still there. My sister Gwen lives 40 minutes away in Portland. Not Oregon. The small one. The one in Ohio that nobody's heard of. My brother Doug lives 20 minutes from my parents with his wife and their 2 kids, Mia and Tucker. I'm the only one who left. I'm the only one who put real distance between myself and that house on Birchwood Drive, which meant I was also, for most of my adult life, the only one who felt guilty about it. The guilt is the mechanism. I want you to understand that before anything else. The guilt is what makes the whole thing run. When I got to Columbus on December 22nd, I had a rolling carry-on stuffed with Christmas presents, a 4-hour drive ahead of me from the airport, and a knot in my stomach that I kept telling myself was just travel anxiety. My mom had asked me 3 weeks before whether I could help cover the cost of a family Christmas dinner at a restaurant. Nothing fancy, just the Italian place they liked, because things were tight, and she wanted it to feel special. I said sure, sent $300 through Zelle. My dad texted 2 days later asking if I could swing the cost of the tree and decorations this year because the car needed new brakes and they were stretched. I sent $150. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had already spent $450 I hadn't planned on spending, plus my own flight, plus the gifts. And I was still smiling when I knocked on the door, because I thought this trip was going to be different. I genuinely thought that my mom opened the door before I could finish knocking. She looked me up and down. Not the way a mother looks at a daughter she hasn't seen in 8 months, but the way someone looks at a package they've been waiting for. She said before she said hello, before she even stepped back to let me in. She said, "Good you're here. I need you to take the kids to your brother's house tomorrow so Doug and Alicia can get some alone time before Christmas. They've been stressed." I stood there with my carry-on handle still in my hand. "Hi, Mom," I said. She waved a hand and turned back inside. "Come in, it's cold. Your father wants to go over some things with you tonight after dinner." Some things. I didn't ask what things. I walked in, and Gwen was on the couch with her phone, and she looked up and gave me this small, tight smile that I didn't know how to read yet. My dad was in his recliner, TV on, and he nodded at me like I'd been there all along. Like I hadn't just driven 4 hours from an airport after a 2-hour flight. Tucker and Mia came sliding down the hallway in their socks, and I crouched down and hugged them and they smelled like maple syrup and kid shampoo, and for a second I let myself believe the knot in my stomach was wrong. After dinner, my dad sat me down at the kitchen table. My mom stood at the counter with her arms crossed, which is her version of backup. Gwen had mysteriously gone to bed early. Doug wasn't there. My dad pulled out a piece of paper. An actual printed piece of paper, which should have told me something. He slid it across the table like we were in a meeting. It was a list. Christmas dinner deposit, still owed $200. Car repairs from October, he'd been meaning to ask me about that. They'd had to put it on a card they were trying to pay down. Gwen's car registration, she'd asked if I could help, because she was between jobs. Doug needed help covering his property tax shortfall, just a bridge, just until February, when the business picked up. I stared at the paper for a long time without saying anything. "We're not asking for everything at once," my dad said in the tone he uses when he thinks he's being reasonable. "We're just saying it would help if you could be a team player here. You're doing well. We're proud of you. But family takes care of family." I nodded. I said I'd think about it. I went upstairs to the guest room, which still had my old volleyball trophies on the shelf, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at my banking app. I want to tell you that in that moment I had some kind of revelation, some clarity strikes like lightning moment where I saw everything clearly all at once, but that's not what happened. What happened was that I sat there for a long time feeling the same thing I always felt, which was tired and guilty and vaguely like I had done something wrong by being okay when they weren't. Then I opened my email and scrolled back. Way back. I'd been using the same email address since I was 19, 13 years of records. I started a note on my phone. I started writing down what I could find, the Venmo requests, the Zelle transfers, the times I put something on my card just this once. The car repairs I'd covered senior year of high school. The deposit on Doug's first apartment, Gwen's ER visit when she was uninsured, and I'd put $600 on my credit card without telling my parents how tight things were for me that month. I fell asleep with my phone in my hand and woke up at 5 in the morning with the screen still on. Here's what I found when I actually looked over the past 4 years since I'd gotten the consulting job and my income had jumped. I had sent money to my family, parents, Gwen, Doug, a total of $43,000, not in one big dramatic gesture, in dozens of small ones, 100 here, 350 there, just to cover us until. You know how tight December always is. It's not a big deal for you, right? $43,000. That's what "it's not a big deal for you" looks like when you add it up. I lay in my old twin bed under my high school comforter, and I thought about the trip to Nashville I'd canceled last spring because I'd been short after a round of family transfers. I thought about the furniture I didn't buy for my apartment, the couch I kept meaning to replace, the emergency fund I'd been rebuilding for 2 years. I thought about how every single time I'd helped, I'd felt warm about it for maybe a day before the next request came in, and how I had never, not once, received a single unprompted thank you that wasn't immediately followed by another ask. I texted my friend Dominique, who's a CPA and also the person I trust most in the world when I need someone to talk me off a ledge or onto one. I told her I was home for Christmas and I was looking at some numbers and I thought I needed to make some changes. She called me back in 20 minutes, even though it was not yet 6 in the morning. "How much?" she said. I told her. She was quiet for a second. "Okay," she said. "Do you have documentation?" I said I had some. She told me to find as much as I could. She told me to also check something. She asked if I was on anything. Any accounts, any loans, anything I might have agreed to without fully understanding the implications. I said no. She said check anyway. It took me until noon, after everyone else had gone out to do last-minute errands, to find it. My dad had added me as a co-signer on a personal loan 4 years ago when I was 28 and new to the consulting job and had decent credit for the first time in my life. He'd framed it as a formality, something to help him get a better rate, and he'd handled all the paperwork and I'd signed where he showed me. I had completely forgotten. I hadn't thought about it since. I sat in the kitchen, where we'd had our family meeting the night before, and I looked at the loan documents on my phone, and I felt something I can only describe as the floor dropping out. Not because I was devastated, because I suddenly understood something I should have understood a long time ago. My family did not see the difference between my finances and theirs. The line between what was mine and what was theirs had been blurry for so long they'd stopped seeing it entirely. And I had let them. I called Dominique back. She stayed on the phone with me for an hour. We went through what I had, what my options were, what I was and wasn't obligated to do. She was calm about all of it in a way that helped me be calm. By the time everyone came home from errands, I had a plan. I had a spreadsheet. And I had made some decisions that could not be undone once I set them in motion, which meant I needed to be sure. I was sure. Christmas Eve dinner was at the house. My mom had decided against the restaurant after all, which I noted but said nothing about. After dinner, after the kids were watching a movie in the living room, I asked everyone to come sit at the kitchen table. My dad. My mom. Gwen. Doug, who'd come over with Alicia. I need to go over some things, I said, and I used his exact words from the night before. Not on purpose, but I heard it as it came out. My dad sat back with the look he gets when he thinks something is about to be a problem. My mom started to say something about the timing, but I'd already opened my laptop. I've been doing some math, I said, and I turned the screen so they could see it. The spreadsheet was clean. Date, amount, recipient, what it was for. Every transfer I could document, color-coded by year. I'd spent the morning building it, and Dominique had looked it over and said it was solid. I didn't yell, I didn't perform, I just read it out loud. March of this year, $1,100 for the heating unit. June, $800 for Gwen's car repair, which I'd been told was a loan but had never been repaid. Last February, $2,200 for the property tax shortfall Doug had mentioned, which at the time he described as a bridge. The medical bill from my mom's procedure that insurance only partially covered, the registration. The groceries I'd had delivered to this house for 4 months when my dad's back was bad. $43,210. 4 years. My brother's face went through about 6 expressions in 10 seconds. Gwen looked at the table. My mom made a sound like she was about to start crying, but I kept going. I scrolled to the loan, the cosign. I printed the original document, and I set it on the table in front of my dad. I didn't know this was still active, I said. I didn't know what it meant when you had me sign it. My credit is attached to this. If payments are missed, it affects me. I've been doing some research and I have a few options. I paused. I want to talk about them before I take any action. My dad looked at the document like he was calculating something. That loan is almost paid off, he said. I don't see what the problem is. The problem, I said, is that I didn't know I was on it, and I didn't know what it cost me. Doug said, Claire, this is, and then caught himself because my name is not Claire and I think the mistake rattled him more than it would have otherwise. Meredith, this is Christmas Eve. This isn't the time. I know, I said, but I'd been waiting for the right time for about 4 years and it hasn't come up on its own, so. My mom finally started crying. The real kind, not the manipulative kind she uses on the phone, though it took me a while to be sure which one it was. She said she didn't know it had added up like that. She said they'd always intended to pay it back. She said I was making them feel like criminals in their own home. I told her I wasn't trying to make anyone feel like anything. I was trying to make sure we were all looking at the same information for once. Then I pulled up one more tab. This one was a screen recording I'd made earlier in the day. Me, on my laptop, calling the bank where my dad and I were listed as co-signers on the loan, the representative explaining, clearly and on the record, what my rights were and what the process looked like if I wanted to be removed. And the rep explaining that removal typically required the remaining borrower to either refinance or qualify independently. I played it without saying anything. The audio was clear. The rep's voice filled the quiet kitchen. My dad stood up. You called the bank? I called the bank, I said. I wanted to understand my options. Before you even talked to us. You went behind our backs? I looked at him steadily. You added me to a loan without explaining what it meant, I said. I don't think I went behind anyone's back. I think I finally got information I should have had 4 years ago. He sat back down. He looked older than he had the night before. I noticed that, and I felt the guilt try to come back in through that window, and I let myself feel it for a second, and then I let it go. I told them what I was going to do. I was going to stop the automatic transfers. I had 4 of them set up, things that had just become part of my monthly routine, things I'd set up during emergencies and never canceled. I was going to contact the bank about beginning the cosign removal process. I was not going to send anything for the items on last night's list. And I was not going to be available to babysit on the 26th, because that had not been part of why I came home, and I needed them to hear that clearly. Gwen finally spoke up. She said, You're really doing this on Christmas Eve? And I said, You called me at 2 in the morning to make sure I came home. So yes, I'm doing this on Christmas Eve. She looked away. She knew what that meant. My dad told me I was ungrateful. that I'd forgotten where I came from. That money wasn't everything, and I'd turned into someone who valued her bank account more than her family. He said it loud enough that I heard Tucker's movie pause in the other room, and I held my breath hoping Mia and Tucker stayed put. I didn't match his volume. I said, I value this family enough to stop a dynamic that's been hurting all of us. You don't have to thank me tonight. But I'm not going to keep pretending the last 4 years didn't happen just because it's uncomfortable to look at them. He told me to leave. I closed my laptop. I said goodnight to my mom, who was still crying quietly into a dish towel. I hugged Mia and Tucker in the living room and told them I'd see them soon. Gwen walked me to the door and didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything either, and I walked out into the Ohio December cold and sat in my rental car in the driveway for a few minutes before I drove away. I had booked a hotel room in Columbus 3 days earlier. I hadn't told anyone. I'd had a feeling. I checked in at 9:30 on Christmas Eve, put my carry-on down in the middle of the room, and sat on the edge of the hotel bed and cried for about 45 minutes. Not because I regretted it, because it's still a loss even when it's the right thing. You can know something is true and still grieve it. The family I'd been flying home for, paying for, rearranging my life for. That family had never quite existed the way I'd wanted it to. And there's grief in that, even when you're the one doing the walking away. When I was done crying, I ordered room service, which I had never done before in my life because it always felt like an extravagance I couldn't justify. Eggs, Benedict, and a glass of orange juice and a little pot of coffee. And I sat in the clean hotel quiet eating it on Christmas morning, and feeling something I didn't have a name for yet. Not happy. Not vindicated. Just unclenched, somehow. The first text came from my mom on the 26th. She said they'd had a chance to talk and that my dad was upset but that she had heard me. She asked if I was still in Columbus. I said yes. She asked if she could come meet me for coffee. Just her. I said yes. She came to the hotel lobby looking like she'd slept badly, which she probably had. She sat across from me at a small table by the window and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and said, I looked at the spreadsheet again after you left. I waited. I knew we asked a lot, she said. I didn't know it was that much. I don't think your father knew either, not when you put it all in one place like that. I said, you knew enough to know I would always say yes. She didn't deny it, she just nodded slowly. That mattered to me more than I expected. Not a defense, just a nod. She told me Gwen had sat down with their dad the morning after Christmas and told him she thought he needed to call the bank himself and ask the same questions I'd asked, so he understood exactly what my being on that loan had meant. She said he hadn't called yet, but she thought he would. She slid an envelope across the table. I looked at it. It's not all of it, she said quickly. It's nowhere near all of it. But we sold some things. Your father's fishing equipment he hasn't used in years, and my grandmother's china that's just been in the cabinet, and I'm picking up extra bookkeeping clients in January. Doug said he can start repaying in the spring. I opened the envelope. It was a personal check made out to me for $2,200. I folded it back up and put it in my jacket pocket. The amount wasn't the point. The point was that it existed, that she'd made it out to me, that she'd walked into a hotel lobby on a cold December morning and handed it to me without a single condition attached. Thank you, I said. She nodded. She asked, quietly, whether there was ever going to be a version of things where I came home and it was just about being together. I told her that was all I had ever wanted, and that yes, I thought that version was possible, but it required everyone in it to stop pretending the last 4 years hadn't happened. She looked out the window for a minute, then she said, Your dad's going to take longer. I said, I know. He was already on his way to longer. 2 days after I drove back to Austin, he posted something on Facebook. He didn't name me, but he didn't need to. Something about how you raise your children and give them everything, and the moment they get a little success, they forget that family is what built them. Something about gratitude and loyalty in this generation. The comments were what you'd expect. Old neighbors, his friends from the hardware store, a couple of distant cousins. So sorry, Gary. That's awful. What happened to family values? I read it once and put my phone down. And then, because I had promised myself I would not do what the old version of me would have done, which was absorb it quietly and say nothing, I did something I had prepared for but hoped I wouldn't need to. I took a screenshot of his post. I pulled up my spreadsheet. I drafted a response that was 4 sentences long, a statement that I wanted to offer some context, a link to a shared document I'd uploaded to Google Drive with the full transfer history, a note that I was happy to discuss any of this privately, and a closing line that said I wished my family nothing but good things and that my door remained open. I posted it as a reply to his comment thread. Then I put my phone in my kitchen drawer and went for a run. When I came back 40 minutes later, there were 11 replies to my comment. A few confused, a few supportive, one from my dad's hardware store friend that said simply, "Gary, I think you should call her." My dad deleted the post 3 hours later. He didn't call me, but he deleted the post. My brother texted me 2 weeks into January. He said he and Alicia had sat down and gone through their finances, actually gone through them, for the first time since they'd bought their house. He said it was bad, but not unsurvivable. He said he'd opened a second account for savings and set up an auto transfer of $75 a week, and he knew that was nothing but. It was the first time in his adult life he'd done it automatically, instead of waiting to see what was left over. He said, and this is the part I read 3 times, "I kept expecting someone to swoop in and fix it. I didn't realize until you left that the reason I kept expecting that was because you always did." I told him I appreciated him saying that. I told him the 75 a week was not nothing. Gwen took longer, the way she always has. She texted in February saying she'd gotten a full-time remote job, which she'd been putting off applying for because she said the application process stressed her out. She said she knew she'd leaned on me and she was sorry and she wanted to pay me back even if it took a few years. I told her we'd talk about it when she was stable and not before. My dad still hasn't called. My mom and I text a few times a week now, short things. "How are you? How's work?" She sent me a photo of the backyard in the snow. It's not what I wanted it to be. It's more than it was, in some ways, because it's honest now. Or at least it's trying to be. I keep this spreadsheet in a folder on my desktop. I added a second sheet to it, a forward-looking one, with a column for what's been repaid, and a column for what's still outstanding. I don't look at it to feel owed. I look at it because there is something grounding about seeing the real shape of things, about knowing the number instead of living with the vague, heavy sense of it sitting somewhere just out of view. Last month I bought a couch. A real one, not a floor model, not one I deliberated over for 6 months because I couldn't justify the expense. A good couch. I had it delivered on a Saturday and I sat on it that evening with a cup of coffee, and I looked around my apartment, which I had been living in for 2 years and had never quite settled into because there was always something pulling my attention back to Ohio. I thought about what my dad had written, that family is what built you. And I thought, okay, yes. And also, you don't repay a debt you didn't accrue. You don't owe the people who raised you your entire financial life and your silence and your guilt. You can love them and be their daughter and also refuse to be the load-bearing wall of a house you don't live in. I still don't know exactly what things look like with my dad going forward. Maybe he calls. Maybe he doesn't. I've stopped measuring the time since the last thing I sent him, which is something. What I know is this: I came home for Christmas expecting to be needed, and I was, just not in the way I'd hoped. And somewhere between that conversation at the kitchen table and that hotel room on Christmas morning, I stopped waiting for permission to take up exactly as much space as I actually take up. If you've been the one everyone calls when the card gets declined, when the rent is short, when there's an emergency that somehow always needs your name on it, I'm not telling you to do what I did. I'm just telling you what happened when I finally looked at the actual number instead of the feeling of it. The number doesn't lie. The feeling has been lying to you for years. I've thought a lot about what made that Christmas different from everyone before it. It wasn't that I got angry. I've been angry plenty of times. Quietly, in the car on the drive home or in the shower the morning after. The shower the morning after I sent another transfer I couldn't really afford. The difference was that this time, I looked, actually looked. With a spreadsheet and a number at the bottom, and no way to soften it. $43,000 doesn't feel like $43,000 when it comes out a few hundred at a time over 4 years. It feels like being a good daughter. It feels like showing up. It feels like the thing you do because you're the one who left, and leaving carries its own tax in families like mine. But when you add it up, when you sit in a guest room with your old volleyball trophies watching your banking app scroll back through years of transfers, it stops feeling like generosity and starts looking like a pattern. And patterns don't sustain themselves. They require someone to keep feeding them. What I've come to understand, not from a book, not from a therapist, though my therapist would probably have a lot to say about all of this, is that consequences are not punishment. When I canceled those automatic transfers, when I started the process of removing my name from that loan, I wasn't trying to hurt my family. I was stopping the part of the system that had let the problem grow this large in the first place. My brother Doug didn't sit down with his finances because he's a bad person. He sat down with them because for the first time in years, the floor wasn't going to appear magically under him. The discomfort of actually seeing what things cost was the thing that changed him, not any lecture from me. That's what I mean about consequences. They're not cruel, they're honest. And honesty, even when it arrives at a kitchen table on Christmas Eve in a spreadsheet with color-coded rows, is a form of respect. It says, I believe you are capable of handling the truth. I believe you can figure this out. I'm not going to keep absorbing the cost of pretending otherwise. The hardest part wasn't my dad's Facebook post. It wasn't even the silence from him after. The hardest part was the moment in the hotel room when I had to sit with the possibility that I had been complicit in this for a long time. I had said yes when I should have asked questions. I had sent money before I thought about whether sending it was actually helping or just postponing something that was always going to arrive eventually. That's not self-blame. It's just accurate. Meredith at 28 signed a document she didn't understand because she wanted to be a team player. That's worth knowing. It cost me something real to learn it. What I'd say to anyone sitting with a version of this story, with the guilt and the transfers and the creeping sense that your family's emergencies have somehow become your budget, is just this. The number is real. Whatever it is, whatever you've been carrying, it has an actual shape, and looking at the actual shape of it is not betrayal. It's the beginning of being honest with the people you love, even when honesty is the last thing anyone wants from you at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night in December. My mom and I are still figuring out what we are to each other now. It's slower than I'd like. It's more honest than it's ever been. I'll take that.